Hello and yokoso to Jahrbacher Park, or hello to Strictly Broken Brews. Today I'm going to introduce you to a new show on this channel, which is a show where I will talk about, like, for the first season, I guess. Um, I'll cover the 10 sets that I think are the best right now since it's VGP season. And I will talk about decks concerning these sets and why you should play these decks, what separates the decks from each other, what are the strengths and weaknesses, why you maybe want to play them at VGP or maybe don't want to play them at VGP. And each week I'll cover a different set and I'll usually cover multiple decks per set. Uh, what may be important to notice that I don't actually have any editing skills or whatever, so this is gonna be a learning process for me. Maybe like by by the next week, I'll figure out how to edit this stuff so I don't have like awkward pauses or whatever when I don't know what I need to talk about. But um, as you might have noticed, this week first up is ReZero. This will likely be the set that I'm gonna play at VGP myself, so I decided to start with it. And I'm gonna cover three ReZero decks. The yellow-blue or quote-unquote Western meta version, the red-blue deck that's very popular in the Eastern metas, and a yellow budget build, which is fun, I guess. But like the important deck is the first one, the yellow-blue meta deck, which I think is by far the best deck. And there's reasons you could play red-blue, which I will like cover when I'll talk about the deck. But like, let's start with yellow-blue first. And the deck is probably fairly well known by now, but I'll just go over each card. Like the level 0 lineup is Runner, because you want a plussing level 0. You can run a fifth copy of like the Reinhardt, no, not Reinhardt, Wilhelm Chaser, or like the Ram 4K if you want 5 plussing over size slots. It's kind of preference if you want 4 or 5. I'm just going with 4 because I prefer to have more utility in a later game. The Salvage Brainstorm is important for multiple reasons in the deck. It's like your best plussing Brainstorm. It has a Ditch Bond to a 2-1, which is an extra discard art, and it's a self-tap Brainstorm, which is always really good. This bomb is something that's actually a bit newer for like the Western builds, I guess, because Japan was playing this as 4-offs, and then people over here started trying it. And it's just a level 0 bomb, and it also allows you to ditch a card and sack it to salvage something. So it's basically a costless hand fix. Well, not really costless. You need to discard a card, like you go neg1, and you can grab whatever you want from your bin. I don't think you want multiples of this, even though the effect is very powerful, just because the effect is very expensive, because it just costs you a card from hand. But it's a very decent utility card that we may have overlooked, like, first time around. This helps set up refreshes and just allows you to be a bit more flexible in what hands you keep or what cards you search. 4 copies of the Riki, because most decks will play 4 copies of the Riki. It's a card that allows you to try field at level 0. It's a card that makes your level 1 combo more consistent. It's a cheap early plus. And the secondary effect can also be relevant if you want to accelerate, like going for your first deck. Okay, so now we get actually, like, these are the fixed slots more or less, like at least these three. Like every deck will run 4-3-4 or 4-4-4 of these. And this is like the stuff that changes from list to list. This is a Rem Global. It's just a global assist, and most people run 2 of this and none of the Amelia Brainstorm. I like running the Amelia Brainstorm to have an extra target for Puck, and because Puck has a power condition for Amelia, and because I like having more Brainstorms, because this deck is very reliant on manipulating your deck to a deck state where you can refresh with the 2-1 Felt. And it's also an Amelia, so that's a plus. But like, this is not a fixed slot. You can change this. That, like, this is preference how you actually assign those slots. It's usually 2 assists in these spaces, and then the 2 handfix Amelia are usually, like, if you play more oversizes, this is the card that you cut for it. Or if you play more bombs, this is the card you cut for it. I like it because it's a free handfix and like a third of a plus, kind of. It's like 30% or something to plus if you play this on turn 1 or turn 2 or whatever. Um, I like this card, but like this is not a centerpiece or anything. Like this is exchangeable, much like these two. We cover level 1. It's just 4 of your plus and climax combo because you run 4 of your plus and climax combo. Just 2 puck and 2 backups. You want 3 backups in this deck, but I think 2 is enough. In this version of the deck that only plays 2 puck. And I'm playing 2 of the 1-0 Emilia and fix because this digs through your deck. This fetches your climaxes, which is both important for your level 1 and your level 2. And it just provides you very good utility throughout the game. This is also not like a fixed card, though I would run 1, but like the second copy is very debatable. You could run a 3rd puck, or you could run a 3rd felt. I'm actually running a 3rd felt over this right now. 3rd felt level 3. But yeah, it's a card that seems less good than it actually ends up being, because it's just so useful throughout most stages of the game. So I'll cover like a bit how the deck plays, I guess. Or no, I'll cover all the cards first, and then I'll cover how the deck plays, and then I'll move on to the next deck. Now we get actually to the meat of the deck that separates this build from all the other builds, which is the Felt Refresh, which allows you to basically refresh your deck for ditching the climax when you have 5 or less cards, and summon 3/2 Felt and search another card, so you don't actually go neck when you do the combo. And basically what this deck does is try to do Felt Refresh and summon a Ram, stick a support behind them, and then snowball for that situation, because you have 2 early plays that both snowball your compression, and a lot of decks can actually deal with 2 at once. Like they'll have a bomb for 1, or they'll have a 2/1 that gains power for 1, but they don't actually have a way to deal with 2. And this also, which is also important, this makes your anti-change counter a lot better, because if you have 2 level 3s, they don't really have space where they can put their own level 3, except like the other lane. But then they're usually giving up these 2 lanes, or like at least one of them. And then their early play just dies the next turn because of your early play. So pressuring the opponent with like multiple lanes of threats that stick, backban, anti-change to like protect them, is very powerful, and allows you to take more or less control of the game and of the field at that point, which usually snowballs into a win. So this is like the center card. This obviously supports the game plan. The anti-change bomb is for opposing anti-earlies, and because you have like a ditch bond for it, which basically this makes a ditch bond like an extra way to discard cards without actually losing cards from hand. And these 2 backups, this is the anti-change backup, and this is the rest counter. The rest counter is fairly expensively costed, but because of the way Felt works and because of the way the deck works, you have enough stock to use it. And rest counter that's searchable is just really powerful. And level 3, it's either 2 or 3 Felt, 1 Reinhardt, 4 Rems, and 2 Amelias. Like the 2 Amelias can be any other level 3 slot, I guess, that's sort of finishing powery or heal or whatever. But I like Amelia the best because it's just very flexible. It has memory kick, which can be useful against certain decks, and the damage numbers just end up like you have a lot of control over your damage numbers with Amelia, and you're running puck anyways. So it's not like the opportunity cost for running it is high, and you want between 9 and 10 level 3s to actually turn on Reinhardt easily, because this is actually a very powerful card. I'm not gonna, like, you can just read his effects, but what this basically does is it turns off all unreversed effects from your opponent. It sets up a 2-turn clock kill, because just burn your opponent 3 times on their turn. And it just interacts favorably with a lot of end games because you deny like every restand because you just memory kick them. And you hit a lot of decks where it hurts with this card. And it's just really hard to interact with. Like the best way to interact with is to not actually let its effect resolve. Like have like a sack counter prepared or something. So this card is actually can become a real liability if you're playing against a deck that run stack counters. So be very mindful of that because that can ruin your day. What's also important to note is you don't need to actually play this in the front row. You can just stick it in the back and ram 3 times from the front row, and you also need to like abuse the fact that you can overplay your own characters to actually like get small enough of a field that this becomes live. Okay, yeah, felt is like the target for this, and this just allows you to snowball compression because it just takes a card out of your deck each turn it survives. And this sort of can snowball into compression because it markers your grave. So if you actually refresh with like 3 or 4 markers, that's also very helpful. And it's just a heal, which is very necessary for like the overall defensive game plan of the deck. So how the deck actually ends up working is at level 0 you do classic level 0 things, hopefully open runner into Ricky, plus from there, and then you transition into level 1 combo that's very non-interactive and like the opponent can't deal a lot, can do anything against it basically. But what's important to note is with this deck, you always need to be mindful of how your actual deck state is, how many cards do you have in your deck, because it's so reliant on the tempo swing, allowing you to actually early play the Felt. Like the strength in this deck between early playing Felt and not early playing Felt is ridiculous. So you really want to try to maximize your chances to resolve a Felt, which it's like it requires you to read the game state and when it's useful to mill and when it's less useful to mill and how much you want to mill. Usually first deck through, you'll just not manage to use the Felt refresh because it just ends up being that you refresh before you actually hit level 2, unless you like miss the book combo, in which case it often so happens that you reach level 2 before you deck refresh, and in which case you actually can just do the Felt refresh during first refresh, and that's actually a situation where you can easily swing back the pendulum from falling behind in the game to actually being ahead and just dominating the game from that point on. So that's one of the reasons why ReZero is just so consistent, is because like it can even brick its level 1 combo, which breaks the bone of many decks, and still like easily come back just by having access to the other climax combo. So yeah, you do that thing, and then at level 2 you basically like your goal will always be to double early play and try to win and dominate board and snowball from there. And if that somehow goes wrong, you have Reinhardt to basically bail you out, because like when the compression game plan doesn't work, you usually lost field, and when you lost field, Reinhardt automatically like goes up in value because you don't need to ruin your own compression. I think that more or less covers like what this deck does, and reasons for why you'd play this deck is that it actually just doesn't really have any bad matchups whatsoever. Like the worst matchup, quote unquote, is probably something like Rewrite that can easily or more easily deal with its early plays. But Reinhardt, like for example, really helps in a matchup because it's just so hard to deal with. You just have game against basically everything, and you're not reliant on any swingy cards, swingy in the term of like Hail Mary plays. You have a consistent game plan that you can just choose to act on most games, and it's just usually enough to win you the game, because it's very hard to deal with all of what this deck can do for most decks. It's just a very flexible deck, despite actually being like fairly non-interactive and linear at times. And this is the yellow blue build, and I think this is the only build that actually has like competitive relevance in terms of like being a top 10 set. The other builds have just don't actually have the pure strength this one does. Okay, so I talked far too much about this, so let's switch to red blue. So I looked at recent Japan topping lists, and I didn't copy any one of them, but I like took elements of each of them and tried to like build the quote unquote standard Japanese list. Like runner Ricky is the same. Sometimes Japan more often runs the Ren 4K than runner, but there's also runner is still more common. What's important here to note is that they switch the brainstorm ratios. They even play 1 or 0 copies of this and typically 3 or 4 copies of this. Because it feeds into their actual game plan, like how they built the deck, which is where we'll come to when we hit level 1. They also like to play 4 of this bomb. I'm not 100% sure why. I think they just like the costless hand fixing and they just like it being a bomb. It doesn't actually like, this card is actually worse in this deck than it is in the yellow-blue deck, but it's still a costless hand fix. So I guess they value that. And they also have less ways to grab counters, and this deck is kind of reliant on cycling counters, so this probably helps with that. Okay, then here we go, level 1. Like, this is where the main difference is. This deck focuses around winning at level 1. The yellow-blue deck focuses around winning at level 2. So for Amelia it's the same, but here we have 4 puck, 2 of this Rosewall assist, 2 bombs that I think are fairly unnecessary, but they like playing it for some reason. And 3 backups. This is usually either 3 Reinhardt backups or 2 Reinhardt backups and an Amelia PR backup, or 2 Reinhardt backups and 2 level 2 backups. But in general, they run 4 backups switched between level 1 and level 2. And the Rosewall is basically a level X, which works well with the puck because then it's a 7-5 level 2. And when you use a startup, it also assigns 500. So with the counter, puck is just straight up 10k. So basically what this deck, well, is actually more because you still have the Amelia assist, so it's like 10-5. So what this deck tries to do is leverage like summon pucks with the Amelia Brainstorm, or summon Amelias and pucks with the Amelia Brainstorm, and then wall off at level 1. This is basically trying to combat level 1 on reverse combos way more heavily than all build does, because this is focused around like walling at level 1 and then like snowballing that into an advantage, whereas the other deck tries to snowball an advantage from level 2. This is like a quote unquote good choice if you're expecting a lot of on reverse combos, if you really want to like deny the opponent on reverse combos. This deck does this better than the yellow blue deck. But it's also kind of a one trick pony in that sense that it tries to like win at level 1, and if that doesn't work then you're just kind of falling apart. But we'll like switch to level 2. Level 2 is fairly similar. They still run a bomb, and they run the anti-change backup in all list. Sometimes they run a 2-1 that can kill, like, or not can kill level 3s. It's just a 2-1 from the trial deck that gains 1k for each character on attack, so it's like a 13k. So that's what they also use to kill early plays. But it's more often not included than it actually is included. So I didn't add it to this, I'm just talking about it now. So they don't actually do anything at level 2 except early play 1 Rem, maybe 2, but I think that's usually not how the deck performs, because you usually just lose 1 lane and protect the other 2 because there's pucks there. And then at level 3 they just try to decompress the opponent with the Ram Climax combo. And usually have some auxiliary finisher here at 3. There's some decks with the Mia, there's some decks with the trial deck Rem, there's some decks with I've seen just the Betty field swap. Yeah, I like they experiment with level 3. Some decks run 1 copy of Felt or whatever. Like they usually run some number of extra finisher, in addition to like the Ram decompression ping finish. So the issue that I personally have with this deck in comparison to the yellow blue deck is that you just give up a lot of pure power, because like your level 3 is so much worse. You can't actually snowball from level 2. Like Rem, when you early play Rem at 2, it's just gonna die. It's never gonna snowball. This is basically just a heal in this deck. And Ram can be played around, and even if it's not gonna be played around, it's just 6 cards that you shuffle in the opponent's deck. It's actually not that much. And you usually don't have the stock for like doing triple ping, like playing this 3 times and then burning 3 times. So it's just a very mediocre card. Like, they probably play it more for the gate than for actually doing the combo. And you don't get you actually theoretically could play Reinhardt, but like this deck doesn't play like Japan just doesn't play Reinhardt for some reason, which is just a very powerful card against the meta, and it's also harder to enable in this deck. I think this deck just attacks the meta in a way worse way because a lot of decks don't really rely on level 1 reverse combos anymore. The main culprit of, I guess why the style of deck was popular was Gochusa. But Gochusa is falling off and it's not that great a deck anymore, and you can beat Gochusa kind of the same way at level 2 as you can at level 1. At level 1 beating, against Gochusa, this specific deck might be better, but against most other decks, the yellow-blue version just performs better against a field, and it also has a more powerful ceiling. But yeah, if you try to beat on reverse combos, some version of this build is gonna be better at that, and should be very serviceable if that is your goal. And now we're covering the yellow budget deck. I'm just gonna quickly go over this because I've seen a lot of yellow budget decks and a lot of them just run 4 of the Crush and some other level 1. Whereas this is actually a way more powerful level 1 package. So the level 0 is just 8 plussing 0 slots, and the Teresa and Brainstorms, because Brainstorms are your best way of plussing and fixing your hand. This is basically the centerpiece of the interaction. If you field 2 Priscillas and 1 Aldebaran, you basically have 2 slots where the opponent just can't front attack, because there's so few sets that actually gain levels on attack phase. It's basically Aseo and Railgun can attack on 1 lane if they have 1 Brainstorm, 2 lanes if they have 2 Brainstorms. Actually, Rewrite also can front, but Rewrite can't really front because it's just weaker on when it front attacks. You have a 7, no, an 8-5, 8-5 level 2. On 2 lanes and a 6-5 level 1 on 1 lane, which is not the relevant part because you just get 2 lanes where your opponent can front attack and you just leverage that as a damage advantage, and also it's an actual advantage just because they can't actually kill the Priscillas. This is way more powerful of an engine than many people think, but it also ends up being a bit gimmicky and has some very bad matchups where it just doesn't pay off. But in general, this is just a way more powerful engine than anything Crush does, and you run the 3 backups, basically protect it and recycle it. And this is also you're playing 2 copies of the call event. What's important here to note is you need to declare which pair you're searching for before you actually look at your deck. So if you say you're searching for Felt and Reinhardt and you only have Felt in your deck, you can only search for Felt and still need to discard 1. If you're searching for Priscilla and Aldebaran and you only have 1 of them in your deck, you still only get to search for 1. Okay. The rest of the deck is it has the same refresh engine, it has the same anti-change backup, and at level 3 it's a bit different. You're playing Betty heal just because it's a heal and you don't actually have another heal in red-yellow, and you play the Ram because you really want to gate. The gate is actually pretty preferable in this deck because it's just an extra plus. It allows you to recycle counters. It allows you to make your refresh easier, and it's just it works better in this. It's the only other additional finisher you really get with Felt, because Emilia needs to run the 1-0 puck, and I think the trial diagram is actually a really bad card. Okay, yeah, this is the budget. If you want to play a budget deck, this is actually really cheap, and this is fairly effective for a budget deck, and you can annoy a lot of people with it. But this is not gonna be a meta deck. This can red-blue can be a meta deck, but I think this is a purely a meta call, and I wouldn't actually put this anywhere near the top 10 best decks. Probably not even top 20 even. It can work in a very specific meta, but I'm actually really not convinced that this build is that great. You can try to convince me otherwise in the comments. And this is what I think the deck should look like. Apart from these 4 slots are debatable. The second slot is debatable. Otherwise, I think this list is basically as refined as it can be. Like this should be or can be a third felt copy, and that's more or less it. So if you've got questions, comments, uh, things I can improve, which there will certainly be a lot of, just leave them down below and tell me what you think, what you want. I don't know. So yeah, this was the first episode of Strictly Broken Brews, and I'll see you next Wednesday.